Day 2 of the New York Giants training camp practices is in the books. What did we learn today? What did we see? We're going to talk about that and more on today's LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. My name is Patricia Traina, and today's show is it's Friday's show, but we're bringing it to you just a little bit earlier. I'm going to try and bring you the training camp report practices. I'm going to try and give that to you a day ahead of time rather than wait till midnight. So this way you have something to chew on and it's timely. So on today's show, we're going to take a look at the day in camp, the Giants completing day 3, but the second practice of training camp on Thursday. We're going to talk a little bit about the hot buzz around training camp. And of course, I will have observations as well as some other goodies for you on today's program. As always, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or watching on YouTube your first watch of the day. Let's get right into everything. And the first story I want to lead off with has to do with running back Saquon Barkley. Now, Saquon Barkley was one of the two podium guys that spoke today to the media. And Barkley said something kind of interesting, or at least something that I thought was interesting. He was obviously talking about, playing in his option year, not knowing what his future is going to be, all the usual stuff. But something else was brought up. And I think this is very important to mention because it's going to factor into, I think, what the Giants want to do with Barkley on offense. And that is, Barkley said he's been doing some work with the receivers, route concepts, running routes, just polishing all that stuff up. And I found that interesting because it's something he did when he was at college in Penn State. And when he came out of Penn State, we all know his first year with the Giants, he had 91 receptions on, I think it was 121 targets, 721 yards. So he was pretty good out in space because he was able to run those routes. And then, injuries happened, and then the Giants offense changed not once, but twice. And suddenly, any thoughts of getting Barkley into space just kind of fell by the wayside. So as part of his preparation this past offseason, not only did Barkley not have to rehab an injury, but he was also able to do some work with receivers, learning how to sharpen up route concepts and just do certain things that the receivers do. So I found that interesting because, again, Barkley's in his fifth season now with the Giants and in the NFL, and always looking to get better, always looking for ways to really, drive home that he could be versatile. And that, in fact, is a goal of his. He spoke to the media, and he was asked about that. And actually, I'm going to play the clip for you, what he had to say regarding expectations that he has of himself and for the offense in general.
I just want to be a versatile player and do whatever I can to help the team win. So whatever the coach asks me to do, I'm going to go out there and try my best at it. And whatever I need to work on, continue to work on, and just involve my game. That's something I want to do, to become an overall better player. And I think this offense is giving me the opportunity to do that. So I'm thankful and blessed to have that. So for me, I just got to take advantage of it by getting in the facility, taking extra meeting time, and learning the playbook.
All right, so there you have it. Barkley is hoping for a big year. Now, here's what's interesting about it. What kind of year does he need to have to get a second contract from the Giants? And I'm not so sure it's a matter of what kind of year does he need to have, but what is the price going to be? The Giants, I just don't see them investing big money in Saquon Barkley because, the running game, I think it's going to be secondary to the passing game. And if the Giants are going to sink big resources, big money into a resource, you do it with receivers and offensive line and quarterbacks, not necessarily running backs. So I am not 100% convinced right now that Barkley is going to be with the Giants beyond this year. Of course, we've got a season to play, so we'll have to see what happens if he does, light it up. But a lot of optimism about Saquon Barkley. And, we've heard this before with him where, at the start of every year, he's enthusiastic. He's looking forward to having a big year. He knows what he can do, so on and so forth. And then injuries get in the way. So really, at this point, this is all just chatter. It's all optimism. It's the honeymoon stage, as it were. Can Barkley make it through the season without an injury? That, to me, is the big question. Not how many yards will he have, not how many receptions will he have, how many touchdowns, etc. Can he make it through the season without an injury? Because thus far, unfortunately, he has shown himself to be injury prone from years 2, 3, and 4. So there's a bit of a pattern there. And if Barkley can do that, then you know what? Great. The Giants will have themselves a nice little weapon. Saquon Barkley is a unique talent if healthy, but they've got to deploy him correctly, and he's got to stay healthy. He's got to do his part and produce. So we'll see if that's indeed what happens. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. In the next segment, we're going to talk about pre-snap motion and why that's the buzz in Giants training camp. So stick around. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast in just a bit. But first, BetOnline.net is the only place that offers the best information on the latest odds, contests, and player props for all your sports betting needs. No matter what sport you're into, BetOnline.net has you covered. Plus, they offer everything you need to know for live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. Head on over to BetOnline.net today to learn more about the trends and the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina, and we are talking New York Giants training camp practice number 2. It is in the books. So just the main storylines to come out of the second practice. I'm going to have observations and some thoughts for you coming up in the next segment. But first, I want to talk a little bit about pre-snap motion, because that's been one of the big buzzwords around Giants camp this summer. And, for those of you who don't know what pre-snap motion is, it's basically before this ball is snapped on offense, the offensive players, the skill position players move around. So, for example, you might have Saquon Barkley initially line up in the backfield, and then he's allowed to shift to, say, the slot. And then all of a sudden the defense thought, okay, we're going to have one backfield. Now there's an empty backfield. So a little bit of shifting here and there. And for the most part, pre-snap motion can help with offense, all right? It can do one of two things, obviously. It can give you a hint as to what kind of defense is going to be run. Is it going to be man? Is it going to be zone? All right. So sometimes that can tell you, give you a clue. But more importantly, what pre-snap motion can do is it can confuse the defense. And that's something that Leonard Williams, who spoke to the media today on the podium, said is really challenging for the defense. And, just trying to figure out who's going to be where. And, Williams made a comment about how, even though he's got his hand in the dirt, but he can hear the guys behind him, the linebackers and the defensive backs, and how they're, constantly talking and, calling out signals and, cautioning guys to look out for this player or that player or whatever. So basically, if you think of in terms of how the defense can sometimes disguise what they're going to do, it's the same thing for the offense, the same concept. And it also helps the quarterback gain an upper hand, as well as the offense, in that you can create a mismatch. But there's a drawback to pre-snap motion. And this is something that head coach Brian Daboll kind of alluded to in his presser, and something that, we're going to be watching, especially when the Giants, put the pads on and they try to start simulating game time tempo, which they haven't really done yet. And that is the more that a play requires a lot, pre-snap motion, the quicker they've got to get out of the huddle, get lined up, and get this all going. Because you only have so many seconds to get out of the huddle, get lined up, and snap the ball. And if you don't get it all done in the time allotted, you're going to get a penalty. So that's something I think we need to keep an eye on, because last year there were several times when the Giants just barely got the ball snapped. I mean, the clock literally read 0 by the time the ball was snapped. There were a few false delay of games penalties called on Daniel Jones. Now you throw in pre-snap motion where everybody's got to kind of work in sync. You can't really have, multiple guys moving at the same time. So it's going to be Barkley moves from the backfield to the slot. Now maybe Daniel Bellinger moves from the left side to the right side. So there's going to be some movement. Now it's not going to be on every play, but there's going to be some movement. And you've got to allow yourself enough time for that to all come into play. And that was a point that Dable made. And it's a good point. It's one we need to talk about, because if you have a lot of pre-snap motion on any given play, you're really not going to allow yourself a whole lot of time to get set and get organized. Give yourself that first full pause that you need before the ball is snapped. So that's something that I think we need to pay attention to as we move forward for the when the Giants start to put the pads on, which will be next Monday. They'll be in pads for the first time, and that's when you'll see the tempo of the practices really pick up. Right now, it's not really full speed as far as the tempo goes, but it'll start to pick up for sure. Pre-snap motion, the other thing I mentioned is it creates confusion and makes the defense think. Now, go back last year, maybe the year before that, the Giants faced teams that ran pre-snap motion. I'm thinking, the Cardinals, for example, from a couple of years ago, they did a lot of pre-snap motion. And if I remember correctly, the Giants defense in that game, they were confused. So with more and more teams turning to pre-snap motion, not only is this going to help the offense with getting ideal matchups and getting in position to make plays, but it's also going to help the defense, because now they have to be sharper. They have to be in tune with what they're doing. They have to be aware of what their assignments are and how those assignments might change. So it now becomes a chess match. And I'm very curious to see how this all comes together, not just for the offense, but for the defense. And it's interesting because Brian Dable basically said, look, I want smart, tough, physical players. The first thing he mentioned was smart. You have to be intelligent. You have to, know your assignments inside and out, and also know what the guy next to you is doing, so that if you have to change because of an offensive alignment, you can do so, in a snap, so to speak. So I just see this pre-snap motion thing. It's exciting. We've seen a lot of it so far in the first couple of practices, as well as back in the spring. But I'm curious to see how it works out, how quickly the Giants can take to it, because it does sound like it's complicated, or can be complicated. And, we'll have to see if maybe guys, how they do with the penalties. Do they avoid penalties, or are they getting called for, false starts or illegal shifts or illegal formations on the offense? And so that's something to keep an eye on with the pre-snap motion. But bottom line, folks, I do think it's going to help the Giants offense. Hopefully it's going to help them get the upper hand and competitive advantage that they've been looking for the last several years, and just haven't been able to find from play to play. All right, coming up next, I have some thoughts and observations from day 2, or actually practice number 2 from training camp. That's coming up right after this. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the LockedOn Giants podcast. I'm Patricia Traina. And just a reminder, the Giants have a practice on Saturday, which means I will be doing a podcast on Saturday. Giants have obviously Friday. They'll be practicing. Saturday will be a special event, that's something they're doing for the fans. I think it's Back Together or something like that. And then Sunday is a day off, which I think a lot of us need. And then Monday is the first padded practice. So that's going to be a big practice. And I think the Giants are going to be in pads, I want to say Monday and Tuesday. I think Wednesday is probably not going to be a padded practice. And then the Fan Fest, I believe, is next Friday. So I can't imagine the Giants will be in pads 3 days in a row. I think they'll have a padless practice on that Wednesday, and then they'll be back for that scrimmage on Friday. So a lot of stuff coming up. And of course, we will bring you all that here on the LockedOn Giants podcast. All right. In this segment, I'm going to give you just some thoughts, some observations from the practices. A lot of you asked me about certain players. What am I seeing? How does this guy look? How does that guy look? And I want to talk about a few guys, some guys that you've asked about, some guys that maybe you haven't asked about, but have stood out for one reason or another. So first guy I want to talk about, who really nobody's asked me about, but I've noticed him not just in the two practices that have taken place so far this summer, but actually going back to the springtime. And this is because in part in the springtime, as you know, Kadarius Toney, Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard were not able to practice in the spring. That opened up opportunities for other receivers. And one guy who has really taken advantage of it is Richie James. Richie James is like 5'9", 190 pounds, if I'm not mistaken. He has really taken advantage of his opportunities. He's made catches. He's been elusive. I like how he kind of ducks under a guy. When he makes a catch, he ducks and gets low and, eludes a wrap-up tackle. Richie James was making plays today, folks. And you know what? Richie James is also a return specialist, which the Giants need. Now, the Giants haven't really done a whole lot with the return game thus far this summer. There's been some basic drills that they're working on, for punt and punt coverage and field goals and all that stuff. They haven't really gotten to the return aspect of it. But Richie James is a guy to keep an eye on here. He has that experience. He's not bad at it, as I recall. Matter of fact, I think he was well on his way to making something of himself in that regard with the 49ers prior to suffering an injury. So Richie James is a guy to keep an eye on, a guy who I think, based on the spring and what we've seen so far, just might slide onto the roster. Now, who might he replace? Well, that's the next guy I'm going to talk about. Darius Slayton. Darius Slayton had his moments in the spring, but thus far this summer, he's been really, I'm not sure what's going on with him, but he's been dropping passes that he should catch. I mean, he had one drop today on Thursday that the ball was literally in his hands, and it would have gone for a deep completion, and he dropped it. And this was a problem that came up with Darius Slayton the last two seasons. He was banged up. You could see his confidence took a hit. But see, here's what bothers me most about Slayton is when he has a bad play, most guys just shake it off and say, okay, I'll get him on the next one. Takes him a while to shake it off. And I'm just concerned for him. You want to see guys do well, but if he continues to practice the way he's been practicing, I don't know that he makes this roster. You throw in the fact that he would probably be like the fifth receiver if Sterling Shepard's healthy, fifth in the pecking order with a $2.5 million cap hit and no special teams contributions. Not a good combination, folks. So I could see Darius Slayton, he's got some work to do if he wants to stick around. And right now, I'm not confident he sticks around. I'll be honest with you. Okay. A guy that has looked really good, and some of you have asked me about this guy, Ellerson Smith. All right, let's talk about Ellerson Smith. So, as you know, Azeez Ojulari is on the NFI list with a hamstring. And from what I understand, by the way, that could be a week-to-week affair with Ojulari. So Ellerson Smith has been really stepping in there, with the first team, opposite of Kayvon Thibodeau. And you know what? Ellerson Smith has looked pretty good. He has been able to penetrate, get pressure on the quarterback. Now, remember, there's no contact right now going on in camp, so they can't, physically wrap guys up. And even if there was contact, you can't bring guys to the ground. You don't want to bring your own teammates to the ground. But Ellerson Smith has shown a quick first step. He has shown that he can get into the backfield. He looks a lot more at home in this defense than I can ever recall seeing him. Now, some of you also asked me, well, how does he look physically? Because last year, I know I had made the comment that he was rail thin. Ellerson Smith put on some muscle, folks, especially on the upper body. And that's going to help him with keeping blockers off of him. So Ellerson Smith is a guy I'm really excited about. And, you look at the competition at that edge rusher spot. You're going to have Ojulari once he's healthy. You're going to have Thibodeau. You're going to have probably Quincy Roche is probably going to make it. O'Shane Zimenez, at this point, I'm not banking on him making the roster. I think, the key here would have been Ellerson Smith and how he did. Ellerson Smith can also line up with his hand in the dirt, and he has taken advantage of every opportunity that's been given to him by the coaches, and he has earned additional opportunity. So this is a guy I'm really excited about. I can't wait to see in a scrimmage or in a preseason game and just see what he brings to the table once pads go on and once live contact is allowed. All right. Another guy that some of you have asked me about is Evan Neal, the right tackle. Now, again, there's been no contact, no pads just yet. That will come next week on Monday, starting Monday. But you can certainly see things in Evan Neal's game that you're going to like, such as there was one play where he fired out to the second level, picked off Tay Crowder, and just basically, even though there was no live contact, had there been live contact, I have a feeling he would have flattened Tay Crowder. All right. And it basically created a big hole on the right side for the running game to exploit, which they did. Evan Neal, I can't honestly say I've seen him, allow any penetration. Again, it's kind of hard because they can't get all physical, there being no live contact. So you kind of have to play patty cake a little bit if you're an offensive lineman. But Evan Neal, man, he moves well. He mirrors his opponent well. I'm looking forward to seeing that dude in pads because he's just been, very, very encouraging to watch. Quiet guy, just goes about, gets his job done. And that's really all you can ask for in an offensive lineman. So I like what I've seen from him. The dynamic duo, you've always heard me talk about a Batman and Robin pass rusher. Can we talk about a Batman and Robin wide receiver duo here? Let's. Okay. Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney. I love what I have seen from these two guys, even going back to the spring. Right? They are shifty. Their routes are solid. What I saw from Robinson, I saw Robinson on a couple plays so far, these first two practices, come back and adjust for the ball. All right. Just like a veteran would. And just heads up play by him. Kadarius Toney, you know what? This is what we've been waiting to see from him. A guy who, the focus is there, laser sharp focus, just the speed, the elusiveness. We've seen those guys line up in the backfield. We've seen them in the slot. We've seen them outside on a few snaps. We've seen jet sweeps. My gosh, if those two are healthy, Mike Kafka or whoever's calling the plays this fall is going to have a grand old time with those two because they are dynamic. They have looked really good so far this summer. And again, going back to the spring, you can say, not just summer, but also in the spring. All right. I mentioned the play caller real quick. Brian Dable said that for the time being, Mike Kafka is going to continue calling the plays in preseason and summer. Said he's doing a good job of it, but really no decision's been made who's calling the plays for the fall. I have a feeling it's going to be Kafka. At this point, why not? If he's doing such a great job, why change it? Let Dable manage the whole team and not have to worry about managing one side of the ball. It just makes too much sense. All right. One other observation, or actually a couple more. I thought Darnay Holmes had an up and down day today on Thursday. Was beat a couple of times, and it looked like he slipped on one of them. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but I thought he had a better practice on Wednesday than he did on Thursday. Aaron Robinson, I continue to love what I see from this kid. I asked Coach Dable about Aaron Robinson and his skill set and what he brings, and is he a better fit for the outside versus slot. I got a standard coaches speak answer, but I love what I've seen from Robinson. He's physical. He uses that great length to swat balls away. And I saw a couple plays where actually the receiver had his back towards Robinson's chest, and Robinson, who has that long wingspan, just kind of reached over the shoulder of the receiver and swatted that ball away like it was a fly. And that's, by the way, something that defensive backs coach Jerome Henderson is really stressing with his cornerbacks and safeties. Always go to look to swat the ball away. Always look to get your hand on the ball. If you can knock it loose, create a turnover. We didn't always see that last year from the Giants. And they are really putting an emphasis on that this year with the defensive backs. So, Aaron Robinson looks sharp. I thought Cordell Flott looked good in Thursday's practice. They had him working mostly in the slot, taking turns with Darnay Holmes. But I'll tell you, I got a chance to see Cordell Flott up close. He is rail thin. And look, I hope he holds up, but he is rail thin, folks. And going to need to add a little bulk, I think, to maybe better withstand the physicality of the game at this level. But I like the skills. I mean, the instincts are there. There's enough to like about his game. You just, like I said, you just have to hold your breath that he doesn't suffer an injury. That's really the only, vice if we're talking about, all things being equal. I thought Daniel Jones, again, looked, for the most part, solid. There were a couple of plays that, he took too long to make a decision, on the deep ball, or he misfired and didn't, miss the receiver. Although with those plays, you never know if it's the receiver's fault or the quarterback's fault. But Daniel Jones coming along. I'm not ready to say he's definitely going to put everybody's fears to rest, but coming along, I would say, was the best way to put it. Tyrod Taylor, boy, could he throw a beautiful deep ball. It's interesting with the backup quarterback situation. Last year, we all know Mike Glennon, despite his best efforts, just wasn't, there was too much of a drop off between Daniel Jones and Mike Glennon. If Daniel Jones can't play this year, I don't think there is as much of a drop off between him and Tyrod Taylor as there was last year between Jones and Mike Glennon. So I think we need to feel better about the backup quarterback situation as it stands. One other guy that some of you have asked me about is Kayvon Thibodeau, and how has he looked? I can't say I've seen any wow plays from him. I have been looking for him and, trying to keep my eye on him when he's out there. Haven't really seen any wow plays. But remember, folks, he missed the spring. So he's going to have to catch up a little bit here. I think he might be a little bit behind, but he's a smart guy. He'll catch up. I'm not worried about him, but just thus far, for those of you who ask, no, I haven't seen any wow plays from Kayvon Thibodeau. Hopefully when the pads go on, we'll start to see them, but right now, nothing. So, all right. So those are my observations from a training camp. And by the way, if there's a specific player that you are interested in hearing more about, drop me a comment if you're on YouTube, or send me an email if you're listening on our audio platforms. And I'll try and, pick up a couple notes about a specific player that you might be interested in hearing about. Or, you could also tweet me, send me a tweet and just stick that Ask P-Train tag on there so that I see it. And I'll see if I can work that into future shows. All right, folks, that's going to do it for me on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. Again, as always, thank you for making us your first listen of the day, or for watching on YouTube, your first watch of the day. Until tomorrow, everybody. And yes, there will be a show tomorrow on Saturday. Actually, we'll probably drop it early Friday, but it'll count for Saturday. Till tomorrow, have a great one, everybody.